My wife pretends to be a 5-year-old little girl. How do I handle this? I met Lucy 7 years ago, and we hit it off instantly. She was vibrant, confident, and intelligent, a woman who had her life together. We fell in love fast and hard, and it wasn't long before we moved in together. She was incredibly driven in her career, and I admired her for it. But there was another side to her that I didn't fully understand at first. In the early days, she occasionally used this cutesy, high-pitched voice. It was playful, almost charming, and I thought it was just a cute quirk. We all have our little idiosyncrasies, right? It was something we'd laugh about, and I didn't think much of it. But as time passed, that voice became more frequent. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was an entire persona, a 5-year-old girl named Little Lucy. At first, Little Lucy would only come out occasionally, usually when we were alone. It was kind of endearing, like she was letting me in on a secret, a private part of her that no one else got to see. But slowly, this alter ego began to dominate her personality. Whenever we were at home, she became Little Lucy. She'd wear these big, baggy white cotton granny panties and nothing else, walking around the house talking in her little girl voice. She had a nickname for her childlike self and would sing these sing-song rhymes about bodily functions: farting, pooping, eating boogers. It was bizarre, but I tried to be understanding. I figured it was some sort of stress relief for her. She had a demanding job and often had meltdowns over it, crying and saying she couldn't handle the pressure. She'd express a desire for someone to take care of her, like a parent. I sympathized with her, thinking this was her way of coping with the pressures of adult life, but it didn't stop there. Our home began to transform. She filled a room with toys and dolls, making it look like a little girl's playroom. When we went to stores, she'd always head straight for the toy section, eagerly looking at dolls and stuffed animals. If someone asked if she had kids, she'd respond in her adult voice, "No, these are for me," and then whisper to me, "I'm a 5-year-old little kid," as if I'd have my own babies. It was clear she knew this behavior wasn't appropriate in public. She maintained her adult persona at work and in social situations. She was excellent at her job and had no problem convincing people she was a functioning adult. But at home, it was a different story. She would answer the phone pretending to be her own child, saying things like, "My mommy's busy right now." This wasn't a sexual thing for her, and it certainly wasn't for me. It wasn't one of those adult baby kinks where people wear diapers or get fed with bottles. This was something else entirely: a bizarre, childlike escape from the pressures of adult life. And while I understood that she was unhappy and struggling, it was becoming overwhelming for me. I tried to be patient and supportive. I'd let her be Little Lucy at home, thinking it was just a phase, something that would pass. But it didn't. If anything, it became more intense. Now, if we were alone at home, she was Little Lucy almost all the time. The adult version of my wife seemed to be slipping away, replaced by this perpetually 5-year-old persona. It was driving me crazy. I didn't marry a child. I married an adult woman, but how do you tell that to someone who starts crying the moment you criticize them? It was like walking on eggshells all the time. I tried gently bringing it up, suggesting we talk to a therapist or something, but even that made her upset. She'd burst into tears, saying that I didn't love her true self, that I was rejecting who she really was. I felt trapped. I loved her, both the adult her and even Little Lucy, to some extent. But I couldn't live like this forever. I needed my partner back, the woman I fell in love with, not a 5-year-old alter ego. One evening, after another meltdown over her job, she curled up in her little kid voice, saying she just wanted a parent to take care of her. I sat beside her, feeling a mix of frustration and deep sadness. "Lucy," I started gently, trying to choose my words carefully, "I love you, but I miss the adult you. I miss talking to my wife, not just Little Lucy. Can we try to find a balance?" Her eyes welled up with tears, and she looked at me, almost pleadingly. "But this is who I am. I can't help it. Being an adult is so hard." I took a deep breath. "I get that. I really do. And I'm here to support you, but we need to find a way for you to be happy without losing yourself completely to this alter ego. Maybe talking to someone professionally could help, not because there's something wrong with you, but because I think it could help you find a way to cope better." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she curled up into a ball, hugging her knees to her chest. I sat there, feeling helpless. Days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. If anything, little Lucy became more dominant. Our conversations grew shorter, less meaningful. I found myself spending more time at work, avoiding home. It wasn't that I didn't love her anymore, I just didn't know how to handle it. One particularly rough day, I came home late. She was already in her little Lucy mode, sitting in the middle of her toy-filled room, humming a tune about boogers. I watched her for a moment, feeling a mix of love and despair. "Lucy," I said, my voice breaking a little, "we need to talk." She looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "What is it, Daddy?" she asked in that high-pitched voice, and something inside me snapped. "Stop it," I shouted, louder than I intended. "Just stop it. I can't do this anymore. I need my wife back, not a 5-year-old. She burst into tears, and I immediately felt guilty, but I couldn't take the words back. I sat down, burying my face in my hands. "I'm sorry," I muttered. I miss you, the real you." Her crying softened, and she crawled over to me, placing a small hand on my arm. "I'm still here," she whispered, her voice wavering between little Lucy and her adult self. "I'm still me." We sat there for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say. I knew we had a long road ahead of us, and I wasn't sure if we could navigate it, but I had to try, for both of our sakes. The next day, I booked an appointment with a therapist. I didn't tell her right away, unsure of how she'd react, but I knew it was a step we needed to take, together. I could only hope that she'd understand and that we'd find a way to reconnect both with each other and with her true self. As the days passed, I tried to engage her more in adult conversations, hoping to draw out the woman I married. But it was like trying to hold on to sand, it kept slipping through my fingers. Little Lucy's presence in our home grew stronger. She'd decorate the house with more toys and childlike drawings, turning our living space into a surreal mix of adulthood and childhood. One evening, I came home to find her sitting in the living room, surrounded by her dolls, talking to them in her little girl voice. I watched her for a moment, feeling a mix of frustration and love. "Lucy," I said softly, "can we have dinner together, as adults?" She looked up at me, a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe guilt, maybe recognition. "Okay," she said in her adult voice, standing up and smoothing her clothes. For a moment, it felt like I had my wife back. We sat down at the table, and I tried to keep the conversation light, asking her about her day, her work. She answered, but her responses were short, almost hesitant. It was like she was trying to hold back little Lucy, but the effort was exhausting her. After dinner, she went back to her room and closed the door. I could hear her talking to her dolls again, the high-pitched voice echoing through the house. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. How could I help her if she didn't want to be helped? I decided to talk to her the next morning, before she had a chance to slip into her alter ego. "Lucy," I said as we sat down for breakfast, "I booked an appointment with a therapist. I think it would be good for us to talk to someone." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and sadness. "Why?" she asked in her adult voice. "Do you think I'm crazy?" "No," I replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I think you're struggling, and I want to help. I love you, Lucy. I want us to be happy, together." She was silent for a long time, staring at our joined hands. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll go." The first session was tough. The therapist, Dr. Martin, was gentle but firm, guiding us through the conversation. Lucy was reluctant to open up at first, but eventually, she began to talk about her feelings, her fears. She explained how being little Lucy made her feel safe, how it was an escape from the pressures of adult life. Dr. Martin listened, then turned to me. "And how does this make you feel?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I feel like I'm losing my wife," I said. "I love her, but I can't live like this. I need her to be an adult sometimes." Dr. Martin nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Lucy," she said gently, "it sounds like you're using little Lucy as a way to cope with stress. That's understandable, but it's important to find a balance. You need to learn how to manage your stress in other ways, too. Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how, she whispered. That's what we're here to figure out, Dr. Martin replied. We'll work on it together. The sessions continued, slowly but surely. Lucy began to open up more, sharing her feelings and fears. I learned to be more patient, to listen without judgment. It wasn't easy, but we were making progress. One evening, after a particularly intense session, we sat together on the couch. Lucy rested her head on my shoulder, her hand in mine. Thank you, she whispered. For what? I asked, stroking her hair. For not giving up on me, she said, her voice trembling. For loving me, even when it's hard. I kissed the top of her head. I'll always love you, Lucy, no matter what. As the months passed, Lucy began to find a balance between her adult self and little Lucy. She still had her moments of retreating into her childlike persona, but they were less frequent, more controlled. She started to engage more in our adult life, finding joy in the little things that used to overwhelm her. We began to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, and there were still tough days, but we were stronger for it. We learned to communicate better, to support each other without judgment. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucy turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and love. I love you, she said, her voice clear and strong. I love you too, I replied, pulling her close. We had come a long way, and there was still a long road ahead, but we were facing it together, hand in hand. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We were going to be okay.